Hey everyone, this is Josh Silver. I'm the founder of Pulse Energy Technologies in Los Angeles. And I've interacted with many of you either on the phone or internet. And a lot of you guys have a ton of questions about PEMF. And I think I've been a little silent too long about the correct answers. And so I thought I would put together a short presentation on some of the information that is needed out there with PEMF and address some of the questions. I think it's a good way to start setting up some dialogue so people really understand what this technology is, where it came from, and clear up a lot of the sort of misinformation that's out there. So the first thing I want to start with is, who am I? What's my role in this technology? Where do I come from? What's my background? How do I know what in the world I'm talking about? First, let me explain that as humbly as possible, I happen to be the oldest manufacturer in North America of this technology. I'm going to dive into it a little bit more in the history of PEMF, but when I say oldest, I don't mean age-wise, I just mean time in this world. I happen to work for the gentleman that brought the first version of high-power PEMF technology over from Europe at the turn of the last century in 2000, and that gentleman's name was Chuck Wallach, and the device was made in Athens, Greece by a gentleman named Panos T. Pappas, a doctor of physics and mathematics. And the first version of high-powered PEMF or marketable PEMF in the world was something called a PAP-IMI, a Pappas ion magnetic inductor, first manufactured in '95, and you can still find it in Europe today, and that's the first version. I finished university, and I ended up working for this gentleman who was the exclusive distributor in North America. And for the first 3 years of my involvement, I like to refer to myself as president toilet cleaner or chief bottle washer. I was the intern out of college, low person on the totem pole. So I was the person that was sent out in the field, take this big machine, give sessions, give treatments, things like that. And I had 4 years of direct hands-on clinical experience with this high-powered device. And when I was first involved, they were utilizing this technology for serious ailments. I'm not going to mention any condition names or things like that, but terminal illnesses, severe autoimmune disorders, and the FDA didn't like that. So when I got involved, Chuck, the gentleman, made a pivot and he started marketing towards the sports teams. And I became the chief go-to guy in the sports teams. My background is I went to school to be a broadcaster. And I was sort of raised in the sports community and knew everything about all of these people, all of these athletes, and it was my dream to work in pro sports. I went to school, I went to Santa Barbara, and then I went to Los Angeles, and I started working for Fox Sports as an intern, and I found out pretty quickly that, in fact, the athletes did not want to be your friend. They were more interested in not telling you anything. And I first started taking this machine all over to the sports world. So when we research PEMF now and we read about Shaquille O'Neal utilizing PEMF, when we talk about the San Francisco 49ers utilizing PEMF, all of these pro football teams, all of these pro baseball teams, as humbly as possible, that's not a bunch of different PEMF devices and a bunch of different companies. That's me and exclusively me. I just want to, hopefully my screen share is proper, and I'm giving you guys some pictures of the very first day that Shaq ever tried a PEMF machine in 2003, and that is a much younger, thinner version of me and an archaic version of the PAP-IMI machine. And these are subsequent years after we developed a relationship, and he had the fortitude and the foresight and the expenses, the ability to fly me around, and he shipped this machine around during his playing career, and I spent a lot of time working with him. I also brought the machine to the San Francisco 49ers in 2003, and I spent the last 6 weeks of the season as basically president treatment guy, that I sat in the corner and I treated every single player for every single condition utilizing this machine, and we documented it in a case study. And if you know the 49ers at all, those are two very well-known players that posed for this picture for us, 2003, and this is, again, a much younger version of me. And then you flash forward now to my son, who had a birthday couple months ago, and he got a phone call from Uncle Shaq, and this is him and I doing the FaceTime. Why am I showing you this? I'm not trying to make this about memories or about myself. I'm trying to first establish who I am in this field, and that I've been a little bit silent about high power PEMF for quite some time. And so this is me with the 49ers a couple weeks ago up in San Francisco, getting them ready for training camp. And I just want to point out, when I bring this up, I don't need to bring up a bunch of degrees and say I went to school for a bunch of years and studied biology. I'm the chief grunt that has been hands-on with his hands and feet in the dirt of high power PEMF for 20 years now. And so I want to point that out. So when I start to talk about the science and the history and the real important stuff, I know this stuff like the back of my hand. I grew up in this, and the same way we eat, breathe, and sleep, that is the same thing with PEMF for me. And I'm sure that my passion for the technology comes through. So the next thing that I want to share is the basic history of PEMF and why it's why it's important for us to know. I don't want to sit here and tell you guys a history lesson like we're back at university and share, hey, PEMF did this and here's this person. There's a reason, because when I look at some of the problems that are out there in the PEMF industry, it's threefold. People don't understand the difference between spark chamber and digital. People don't understand the difference between high power and low power. And really, people don't understand the difference, that they are not the same technologies. And in fact, other industries, when I meet with, talking about this today, when I meet with other CEO groups, other industries look at PEMF and it's almost laughable, because they equate it to saying, do you guys realize that Hertz is arguing with Schwinn, or the boat manufacturer is arguing with Tony Hawk's skateboard, and you guys are all fighting for the same customers and the same people and the same outcomes when it's not the same? And that, I think, is the single biggest problem in the industry. So as best as possible, I'm going to be as arbitrary and explain the history, how PEMF works, some of the basic differences. I want to talk about if Dr. Pollock is really a PEMF expert or not, a sample of some cases, and then some Q&A. And we'll try to address as much as we can as succinctly as possible. So the history of PEMF and why is it important to know? Again, I have some screen sharing and stuff like that. And I do want to point out that a good friend and somebody that works for Pulsed Energy, Chelsea Mansour, is on this chat, and she's helping moderate. So if you have any questions, you can send it in the chat for her, and she'll sling them to me when the time is appropriate. So let me just first start off with probably like the most important thing in terms of the background of PEMF. And I'm going to bring up another presentation just so everybody has things to look at when I talk about this technology. A lot of people don't understand that the main difference in terms of high power, low power, things like that, why we utilize that, there isn't a choice. It came from the use of Tesla and Tesla's technology. I'm going to share here just my screen. And I want to point out that my absolute favorite picture with PEMF is this picture right here in the lower left-hand corner. And this is a gentleman out of the H.G. Fisher, out of the Sears catalog in Chicago in 1932, using an H.G. Fisher electrotherapeutic device. And whether you are a fan of high power, low power, spark, digital, whatnot, we can all agree that when we look at this photograph and we have an applicator that has created a coil as inducing current into this person's shoulder in 1932, this is not a new technology. This is exceptionally old. And the concepts, the science, how it was utilized has been vetted, has been around for a very long time. The first guy that brought this technology to light is Nikola Tesla. And as we all know, Tesla was a fan of lightning, was a fan of science. And believe me, when I do my in-person trainings, I talk for almost a full day on Tesla and his role and his involvement in it. But because our time is limited, I decided to really limit it and share a couple points related to Tesla and how he got involved. Tesla studied lightning. He studied the arc, the discharge, the charge, and application of lightning, and the ability to stimulate healing over a period of time. He found that the cells had the ability to resonate. And when we talk about spark chamber machines, the spark chamber is attempting to literally recreate Tesla's work with lightning in a bottle. It is a high voltage discharge across the electromagnetic spectrum that is literally covering almost all the frequencies at once. I'm going to bring up a slide here in a second that illustrates that. But when we talk about Tesla, I just want to point out that out of his biography in one of the books in the early 50s, it states in succinctly as possible, Tesla created machines that flooded the human body with electrical currents and strong vibrations intended to soothe aches and promote healing. He wasn't just the inventor of the electrotherapeutic device, he was also a client. Remember, this is a book from the 50s. He was able to get one of his good friends, Samuel Clemens, to try out the machine. Tesla marketed this invention, and the first successful or marginally successful commercial enterprises of his old age was the Tesla Electrotherapeutic Company. And so I bring that up just for one point, is that for almost 90 years, the only version of this technology that was marketed, that was studied, was researched, was high power spark discharge. And there's a reason for that. And I'm going to bring up the reason for that when talking about one other simple point, and that is the electromagnetic spectrum. This will give us an opportunity in which to tie into people spark, digital, and how PEMF works. PEMF works in a very simple, succinct manner. We have a cell that has the ability to generate energy like a little battery. When our cell is injured, when it is sick, when it is weak, when it has disease, the measurable voltage in that cell is reduced. And a good example is we have a collection of cells that have the ability to store a charge, a negative voltage charge of anywhere from negative 70 millivolts up to 120 millivolts. And obviously the size of the cell matters in terms of the storage. The voltage in the cell is reduced as we run into injury, illness, or disease, and therefore the functions of the cell are stopped or reduced. The byproduct of this is cellular misfunction, is disease, is slag, is toxin, is waste, and in some cases, in extreme cases, the cell has just enough energy left in which to do one function, which is divide or replicate itself, right? And in many circles, they refer to this term as malignancies. What the machine does, what high power spark chamber PEMF does in terms of the theory of cancer by Dr. Panos Pappas, based on the papers of Dr. Tesla, is that the field that is generated from the magnetic pulse, from the applicator from the machine here, makes a strong but short electromagnetic field that passes through the cells very fast. Each time the machine pulses, the cells restore or retain a charge, just like a battery. When the cell is full of energy, it reads its little DNA coding and says, wait a minute, I'm not an injured cell, or I'm not a sick cell. I'm supposed to do this, and goes back to performing its normal or regular cellular function. So a real short, succinct way of explaining what does PEMF do to the cell? It's homeostasis. It is putting the cell back into balance. Okay, and that is a real good way in which to understand what it's doing. So when people talk about, oh, well, yeah, it brings oxygen, or it does blood, increases circulation, it does all these things, the cells become more permeable. It's not quite exactly in that manner. It is really the cells doing the work. The cells become more permeable from something called electroporation or electroporosis. And that is the uniqueness that is found typically with high power PEMF. And what that is the cell gates are electromagnetically stimulated, so they are open, and they remain open for about 2 to 3 hours after a session. Water, nutrition, oxygen, you name it, can flow into the cell much better, much more efficiently. Waters can dissolve the toxins and flush themselves out. That's why when you read about people that have had soreness, muscle pain, acheness, flu-like symptoms after too much PEMF, that's typically what's happened, is a lot of the toxins have been brought up to the surface and they just have not been flushed out. So in short, PEMF is a high power battery charger for the cell. But what I want to point out as we tie into the basic differences between spark and digital, and why they're two different technologies, this is where it sort of bleeds into that, or marries into that. I want to go now to a different share, just so I can share one other slide that relates to all of this. Let me just see if I can get it to come up on my whiteboard. Okay, perfect. So hopefully it's gonna, did that share my whiteboard properly? I don't think that it did. Can you guys see that or no? No, I don't think so. So that's okay. We'll come back to it. So let me just dive right into the differences between Spark and digital, and how PEMF works and things like that, how they're married together. So the belief is that started with Rife. And if you guys know Rife at all, Rife believed that every cell has its own frequency, has its own vibration, and that injury or illness or disease also has the same thing. How Rife believed that his technology worked is, let's say somebody had problem or disease A, he would tune into that frequency to get it to resonate and then die off. Okay, PEMF does the opposite of that. It is like harmony. And what it is doing is it is exciting the frequencies on the electromagnetic spectrum. The cells that are injured, the cells that are weak, the cells that are damaged resonate to that pulse. Okay, and so when we get to, now it's working, now when we get to high power PEMF, oops, sorry about that. When we get to high power PEMF, it's the marriage or the combination of everything together. And so when you see, where did, when you see this question, what is PEMF therapy? The single most important thing to understand, the work with Tesla, D'Arsonval, Priori, Doto, all of these scientists, Lukovsky, all of these scientists that permeated PEMF over the last century, what is understood is that it is a dual function, not a singular function. So when we talk about low power, Beamer, IMRS, Curatron, it's a different technology, and here's why. PEMF therapy has two functions, not one. The first function is induction of electricity into the cells to stimulate healing. Okay, and how we equate that as an end user is we take our applicator and we can be a foot away from the problem and we don't have strong muscle contraction. We feel it hone in and go directly to the problem. The high frequency issue where the shoulder, say the labrum is torn, is resonating to the pulse, and without even contacting it, you literally feel it go right to the pulse. Oh my goodness, that was my bad spot. How does this machine or how does this technology know? That is the primary function. The secondary function is the induction of the frequency, or what some people call a mild electrical stimulation. And you feel your muscles twitch, okay? The majority of the low power, or sorry, not the low power, the digital machines, that's exactly what you feel, and that is exactly what you experience. You feel a strong to mild muscle contraction. Does it work? Heck yes, it works, because you are taking those lymphs, you're taking the muscles and you're pumping them in exercise. Is it the true intention of PEMF? That's why we're having this conversation. That's why I'm bringing this up. Okay, so when we talk about low power machines like a Curatron, like an IMRS, things like that, we are talking about a non-spark, a computer that is attempting to recreate a broadcast of frequencies. And when we talk about these low power technologies, we are talking about a small or a certain set or a bandwidth on the electromagnetic spectrum, typically 0 to 60 hertz. Some of them go up to 100 hertz. I think there's another one that's 200 hertz. A range of frequencies. And any of the issues that fall into that category are going to get a mild result. I had a conversation with people today where I explained I want to talk about the technology and not recommend my machine itself. I want to recommend the different versions of it. And I explained, if the option is don't use anything or use the technology, we recommend you use that technology 10 out of 10 times, because something is going to be better than nothing. But the way to understand what the low power does is to understand a piano or a guitar. The low power one is walking up to the piano and they're hitting 1 or 2 keys and playing a note. And when you hit the right note and you hit the right key, it sounds beautiful, it sounds majestic, and you get a result. Okay, but that doesn't work for everybody in a majority of health conditions. So when we're talking about high power ones like spark chamber discharge ones, which I'm going to show my visual here in a little bit, we are talking about a child walking into the room and seeing the piano and putting their hand on every single key and hitting them all at once, a broadband discharge across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. So when we're talking about a low power one, we're talking about 0 hertz to 60 hertz or 0 to 100 hertz. When we're talking about spark chamber, we're talking about 0.25 hertz to 2.2 up to 2.5 gigahertz or 250,000 megahertz. This is a broadband discharge across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. This isn't a small excitation. This is a huge one. It is a broadcast. Okay, and the way to think about it is this: it's not that ooh, it's more powerful. The note on the guitar is being strummed stronger, and when you strum that note boom stronger, it resonates longer and travels at a greater distance. Okay, and so when I discuss power with PEMF, that is what I'm talking about. It shouldn't, oh, well, it hurts more, well, then it's better. It shouldn't bounce your whole soul around and flop it out, but you should feel the resonance and the pulse hone in and go right to the spot in terms of what Tesla's design of high power PEMF was. Okay, now I want to just bounce around a little bit more and go back to the low power. The low power works in a lot of situations and a lot of conditions. In the 0 to 60 hertz range, if you're able to utilize something 4 or 5 times a week, you know, however, whatever the protocol was, the one that somebody was telling me today is they're doing it 4 times a week, 2 hours. If you're able to utilize that, you are going to get some results. It doesn't mean that low power doesn't work, okay? Where we're coming from, where our technology is we are as close to what the intention of Tesla's technology was. We don't mudsling or throw out people under the bus and say this one is dangerous or this is ineffective. Everything has its limitations. And that's why when I talk with other leaders in other industries, they equate this to, like I said before, Hertz rental car company arguing with a roller skate company. Different modes of transportation, different people, different intentions, different needs that need to be fit. So that sort of addresses high power and low power. It is the oscillation of the frequencies at once. Okay, I want to talk about the difference between spark and digital, where I can sound a little bit more like a homer if you guys know what that is. My single biggest issue that I have in the technology right now is a lot of these digital machines out there that are being sold for $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 that are beautiful, wonderful pieces of furniture, have amazing lights and buttons and knobs, look freaking amazing and cool, but do not have the same power, outcome, effectivity of any of the spark chamber ones. I did a 30-minute video a couple of years ago recommending in order the other spark chamber manufacturer companies out there, not including ours, just to get a point across that the difference between spark chamber and digital in terms of high power is dramatic, and I want to explain the physical sensation. I know there's a couple people out there that I've messaged with that are on this video that have had some questions about this sensation, and we're going to get into some cases and some protocols here in a minute. I just want to point this out, is when you research high power PEMF, when you look at the engineering, when you look at the physics of it, there's a bunch of factors in which to create waveforms. And I'm hoping now when I do this share, and maybe Chelsea, you'll be able to hop in and tell me if I get the whiteboard right. Can everybody see this?
Yeah. Yeah. It's
awesome.
On there.
Okay, cool. Cool. It's blank on mine. So I just want to point this out. So people talk about waveforms and things like that. And I do have low power waveforms, but I need people to understand what the waveforms are and what they mean. And I don't need to see this. I can do this in my sleep. I've done this forever and it's amazing. I want to point out, just backing up half a step, how do I know the information I'm about to share? I have been in the laboratory at Intertech 6 different times over a period of 11 years to see the actual testing of this technology in terms of high power. If anybody in the high power world is telling you, oh yeah, I bought one of those meters on Amazon and I tested, I know the difference, they are lying. Okay, and they're lying simply because an accurate test needs a Faraday cage, needs the blocking of all frequencies, and it needs to be secured to the PEMF device to be an accurate measurement. And those devices don't have the proper shielding on which to do so. Now ask me again, ask me how I know. How do I know? Because I've bought every single one and blown out every single one. We bought out $2,000 spectrum analyzers on computer. We spent a fortune until we found out the way that you test high power is take it to an independent laboratory where they can take it into a room that is a complete Faraday cage, blocks out all frequencies, makes the test neutral, and then they run the machine and they give you a printout of what the waveforms are. This is what the science dictates over the years, and this is what we learned. The very first slide that you see where it looks like a up and down. That is not my child actually drawing on a piece of paper. That is a crude or rudimentary version of the original high power PEMF devices that are out there. That particular, or, I'm sorry, the second one is the very top one going in order. Let me back up. The very top one going in order would be a digital one. The very bottom one is ours. And there's a dramatic difference when you look at the 2 or the 4 and the evolution. So when you look at the very first one, that is going to be digital spark, okay? Or digital versus spark. That is a digital PEMF waveform. Quick rise, quick discharge, limitation of frequencies, what people call a classic sawtooth. When you look at the next one, that one is the other companies out there making a PEMF spark chamber device. And when you look at the width or the pyramid or the spike point, it's a little bit longer and a little bit greater. There's a longer exposure in the spark or the pulse to frequencies. And immediately, just by visually seeing that, I can tell you that they'll get better outcomes. That when you use, and you can insert company name here, a spark chamber that's not ours, you're going to get a better outcome versus digital over a longer period of time, simply because of that reason. Longer exposure to more frequencies at a longer and more effective rate, okay? Part of the reason that we know this is in years of testing, we found in engineering documents, in physics books, that the type of material utilized in which to create the spark matters in terms of the frequencies passed, the frequency or the depth of penetration, or what some of you people refer to as Gauss, as Tesla and things like that. That matters. And we know the components on the inside of all the devices. So that's how we can say this unequivocally. This is why this one would be stronger than this, and this one would be better than this, and this one would be better than this, because it's hard for physics and mathematics to lie. Okay. So going back down to the waveforms, we now have the third of these pyramids. And the third one is the Ford Model T, is the PAPIMI machine, is the groundbreaking version of this technology. And they figured out what type of materials to utilize and how much power to create additional resonance. And when you look at that pyramid, if you look at those waveforms, those third ones, there's a little bit of a ledge before it drops off. It almost looks like a human heartbeat. And that is something we call electromagnetic resonance or nuclear magnetic resonance, NMR. And how you equate that is, oh my goodness, I feel it right in my bad spot. That is unbelievable. I hold it a foot away and it feels like it's going right to the problem. The more that you have that ledge or that resonance, the more you feel it go bad to the bad spot and less muscle contraction. The last one is our machine. When we spent 1.5 years doing research with our technology, we found out what the PAPIMI was doing, how it became effective, and we widened or increased that exposure to the nuclear magnetic resonance, to that ledge. And that is why when people try progressively devices, you can physically feel the difference. So then I get the question, well, how come sometimes I use the digital machine and it makes me jerk a lot more? Here's how. When you decrease the size of the transformer, of the capacitor, of the spark chamber, you're decreasing the power output at the applicator. But if you take that cable and you create more turns in the cable, for example, that digital high power, $40,000, beautiful looking technology that's out there, they have an applicator that has 6 or 7 turns on each side. We have 2. Okay, and ours is a lot different in terms of sensation. Okay, they are making up for the lack of frequency discharge, for the lack of resonance, for the lack of nuclear magnetic resonance by adding turns to the cable. I know because I was told 20 years ago you can make a PEMF device off your car battery, and you absolutely can. Does it mean it's going to work? No. Does it mean you can put enough turns in the cable or electrical wire to create a magnetic field to feel something and make your muscles contract? Absolutely. And that's the difference. That is why when you experience the devices, there's a different sensation with all of them. My last point that somebody had texted me about is I forgot to just finish where I came from in this technology. So I worked for the guy who brought this over from Europe from 2001 to 2004. And at the height of the technology, he had a sudden heart attack and he passed away. And he left the technology to me and my former business partner, who has since, God rest his soul, passed away. And what happened was at the end of 2004, we started making our own version of the technology to make a US version, one that wasn't $60,000, that was not making wild medical claims, getting in trouble with the FDA, things like that. We decided that we needed to make something that was going to be US made. So we made the first version of our technology in 2005. We sent out prototypes to the 49ers, to a couple well-known people out there in the world, tested it, rebuilt it, tested it, rebuilt it. And in 2006, we came to market and we were the first high power PEMF manufacturer. At that time, there was a gentleman, I won't say him by name, but his initials are MD, and he's the manufacturer of another version of technology. We knew him. He was a friend of my mentor, Chuck Wallach. And when Chuck passed away and he knew we were making our machine, he basically said, hey, Josh, the market's big enough for both of us to make a machine. I'm going to take what I know from the PEPI and I'll make my own machine. And that's how the other PEMF spark chamber came out. At that point, a couple years into the game, MD sold a machine to a guy initialed PW, and the first versions of MW's machine were pretty rudimentary. They broke down, and PW's machine broke down quite a bit. So PW re-engineered his machine and made his own spark chamber machine called the Magna Charger, or the MG-33, which then evolved into digital. And that ties into the big question I get from people. Well, what about the maintenance between spark and digital? We are comparing two totally different technologies with two totally different outcomes. If you have a spark chamber device that is constantly breaking down, I would first talk to the manufacturer and ask why, because it shouldn't constantly break down. We find that our device is like an automobile. As long as you utilize our preventative maintenance tactics, as long as you follow the maintenance guidelines, maintenance is pretty much done on the site. Do you need to do some maintenance with spark chamber? Absolutely you do. But when you work out hard and work out heavy and build muscle and get your body and life in shape, you need a recovery time. You need something in which to replenish that effort. And that is the same concept with our machine. We are creating a high voltage arc that is controlled and discharged. Over time, those points do wear out, so they do need service. But the byproduct is, or the trade-off of the clinical outcomes, of the rewards, of the end user results, it's not even a comparison. And that's why we've started to do all these videos. So you don't hear from us, you hear from everybody else. With that, I want to go into the next part before we go to a lot of the questions and the pulse energy cases. I'm going to do a whole video on this with, stop this. I'm going to do a whole video about this once we're done. But I do want to talk about Dr. Pollock and whether or not he's an expert in PEMF. I had an internet conversation with somebody 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago or so, that blew my mind. That was really one of the onuses. And she sent an email or a direct message basically saying that Dr. Pollock is the person that popularized PEMF in the 70s and 80s and had a bunch of clinics in the United States that treated people with PEMF. He's the expert. And it blew me away, because I would imagine if you call him up and told him somebody said that, he would laugh on the phone with you, because it couldn't be anywhere near the truth. When you read his bio, Dr. Pollock's bio makes it very clear who he is in the PEMF game and where his background is. He is not a practicing medical doctor. He has a sales company and a sales organization with their primary goal in which to sell PEMF devices. Okay, he did not have a clinic treating PEMF people for a very long time. In fact, he didn't have a clinic that had a bunch of PEMF cases. He utilized PEMF devices on single patient cases and then consulted on a bunch of them. However, these were all low power static devices, 1998, 1999, 2000, 2001. At that point, he then became a salesperson. He did not author any of the papers that his name were tied to. He edited and translated them. He did not try any high power PEMF device until 2008. He did not start utilizing and becoming a player in this game until 2010. And I want to point this out for one specific reason. He is probably the single biggest source of sales for PEMF, it seems, worldwide. And I know, after speaking with two of the other manufacturers like myself who have chosen not to align ourselves with him. There's a severe integrity imbalance in our opinion, because how can you give an unbiased recommendation of product when you are also selling the same product in which you are recommending? It's a little bit of a conflict of interest that we feel should not be out in the game. And I want to point that out because a lot of people are now finding out that he is a salesperson after they've purchased from him. And it's not something that we think, it's not something that we want to align ourselves with. And that's what I'll say with that. I'm going to do a whole video breaking this down a little bit further, but I wanted to point that out. So with that, I want to sort of delve into a couple samples of PEMF pulse energy cases that I ran into. I know there's a lot of questions about, does it work on this or does it work on that? But there's a couple cases that I want to bring up or talk about today that was pretty remarkable, that I heard from people. I did an interview today with a doctor out in Arizona that was treating somebody for low back pain. And this was a woman that had 7 or 8 years worth of low back pain and was going there, and she had 6 or 7 sessions. And he asked her, "Hey, how's your back going?" And she said, "Well, you know what's funny? My back isn't that much better, but the urinary incontinence problem that I've had for 19 years is gone overnight, and I can't believe it." And it blew me away because it sort of pointed out to us that the body has priorities in healing, and whether or not we want to choose, we want our back or our shoulder or our neck addressed, it really chooses what to do, and the body inherently knows how to address the problem with PEMF. And to hear that was remarkable, because her back problem didn't clear up until the 3 or 4 sessions afterwards, once that initial problem came up. Chelsea and I have probably spent a year's worth of time over the past decade talking about different amazing, remarkable cases. And I can sit here and do a whole video on that. Instead of that, what I'd like to do is just sort of go into some of the questions in terms of clinical outcomes. Okay. I know that everybody wants to know how, in terms of application. Chelsea, do you want to sort of lob some questions at me and I'll dive into them?
Can we do some of the protocol questions that were asked in the chat?
Sure. So which one do you want me to do?
Let's do Scott's first.
Okay. So I see these questions. Let me address them all. I'm going to address them all with the protocols and things like that. Perfect. So let me again talk about my background and where I got this information. My mentor, first, before he brought this technology over to the United States, spent 4 years in the Philippines doing clinical trials with the Philippine government and the PEMF machine. They basically gave him carte blanche to treat everybody at a hospital. They documented everything over a 4-year period, and they developed PEMF protocols that we have standardized over the last 15 or 20 years. There's a method, there's a science, and there's an understanding to our PEMF protocols and why they work. So when we talk about different applicators, here's the thing, and I'm going to upset all the salespeople that are out there in the world, but the applicators are bells and whistles for the most part. It is getting the right size field for the area and the issue. Okay, and I'm going to dive into that just a little bit further. Typically, what we tell people is we take a good size, average size coil or applicator, and we start first at the chest, heart, lungs, thymus. As close to the chest as comfortable, just coming past the collarbone. You want to feel the inductance go up the shoulders and back. We'll do that for 2 to 3 minutes. We will then start like a halo and bring it above our head and bring it down to where it's comfortable. Some people, like my kids, can bring the loop here. Other people, they can bring it here. You bring it to where it's comfortable for you, and you do 2 minutes. The third position is you bring it over and you do the mid-thoracic. And what that looks like visually is above the tailbone, below the shoulder blades. Let's see if I can get a good shot in here. Okay. Adrenals, kidney, backside of the liver. We do those 3 points, and then we focus on the problem anywhere 3 to 10 minutes. Okay. Typically, we'll recommend you do that anywhere from 2 to 4 times a week, 20 minutes or so. It varies with which machine of ours you have, with what access you have in terms to the treatment, because some people are driving, an hour each way to a chiropractor or an office, and they can't get there as often. So there's a little bit of give and take with that. But with our technology, that's typically how you would utilize it. Now, if you back up half a step, you'll say, well, we didn't talk about the condition. That's right. We didn't talk about it, the condition. I'm talking about literally every condition under the sun. That is how we start a session. Why? Heart, lungs, thymus, digestive tract, crown. We're doing our brain, mid-thoracic. We're doing our adrenals. We're doing our kidney. We're doing the backside of the liver. We're doing all of the internal organs of the body. Okay, in Western medicine, we look at this with PEMF. Is the whole theory of PEMF is it's not your broken toe that heals the broken toe. It's the systems of the body working together. Our immune system is generally all over our body and in our gut, right? But it is really the collective of our cells working together that's going to facilitate whatever happens biologically. So we energize those areas first, then we focus on the problem. I tell practitioners every single day when I do video trainings, if you don't believe this, it's totally okay. I want you to try it. Take person A and person B and do it whatever way you see fit, and then do it our way and bring back the results. I'm telling you, the sports teams, they try it all the time, and every time they're like, wow, it's remarkably different. Okay, in Western medicine, it is 3 main energy points or chakras that we're energizing with the machine, and that's why we utilize it that way. So generally speaking, let me bring back up the chat. To talk about some of these things, whether you're having an issue with Lyme's, it's where the issue is that we will focus the session after doing these 3 main points. Now, mind you, we do a specific protocol training that talks about every single condition. So if somebody signs up and wants to do our training, we talk about this for almost 2 hours in detail, condition specific. So I'm just giving you like a little sip of the Kool-Aid because obviously for this particular thing, we don't have time to do all that. Let me just see what other questions are out there, Chelsea, that I'm just having a little trouble seeing which ones that are out there. It takes a little bit.
Best applicators for like overall wellness. Sure. And like good sleep and kind of like sure. A not very deep use of a machine.
Yeah. So let me bring up in terms of best applicators. I had there's a physicist that we worked with years ago that did a crazy video of using high power PEMF underwater. If you get time, check out our YouTube. It's pretty remarkable to see this, but he gave me these analogies to understand what's going on. And we have found that PEMF is most effective when we are dropping a rock into a puddle, not skipping a rock, across the ocean. Okay, and the difference obviously is visually when you take a pebble and skip it across the ocean, it's these small waves that disperse slowly over a long period of time versus a big rock landing in a puddle that splashes everywhere. And the reason that we utilize other applicators for our machine, Chelsea will tell you, we have 6 or 7 different ones that we can make, and we have custom ones too. People, hey, can you make it into my chair? We had somebody that we built into the backing of his plane, his private plane, so he could treat himself from Santa Barbara to England. Neither here nor there. The goal is to create those 2 things I talked about, induction and resonance, or the contraction of the muscle and the ooh, I feel it in my bad spot. And so when we get a smaller, more focused applicator, that is for a smaller, harder to reach area. Again, without talking about conditions or anything, Scott, I'll give you an example. If somebody has a shoulder problem, I'm going to use a larger applicator. If somebody has a wrist fracture, has a dislocated finger, has plantar fascia, I'm going to use a smaller, more focused applicator. Okay, and if you think about it with speakers and amplifiers and things like that, if you've ever been up to speakers and amplifiers, there are certain points at certain angles it's not as loud as others because of the broadcast range versus something that's small and focused and specific. So we're manipulating the magnetic field in which to sort of do or create that. Going to the next question where somebody had asked about mild treatment, things like that. Let me explain what I've learned over the years. And this is a great analogy to understand. When you're utilizing PEMF, regardless of the machine, regardless of the technology, if you can feel it, the goal is to feel it without ever crossing the line of uncomfortability. I will use Shaq as the perfect example because I'm allowed to use him. The very first time, that picture when he had a problem with his shoulder, he had the loop all the way through and he's got this look on his face. man, and you would have thought that somebody was punching him in the face over and over. I'm like, dude, are you okay? And he's like, it hurts so good. I'm like, dude, I'm not trying to hurt you. And he's like, you can hurt me. I'm Superman. I'm like, but we're not trying to hurt you. We're trying to heal you. And he was like, oh yeah. And he backed it off and he was like, oh yeah, we want the body to relax during a session. And that is a critical component. The goal is to feel it without ever crossing the line of uncomfortability. Okay. And only you as the end user knows that. I had a conversation on both sides of the spectrum about this today. I had one call where I was explaining that an inch is a mile, and if this is too strong, back it off an inch and it becomes tolerable. And I had another practitioner that said, I'm leaving to my patients to do, and they're holding it out here and they're not getting results. Are they feeling it? Well, no, not at all. You have to bring it in. Okay, so the goal is to feel it just enough to where you are getting a sensation, but not going, ow, 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 stop. Hopefully that addresses that particular part of it.
If someone has a device that just has a mat, should they turn themselves around on the device and use it at different angles, or should they just lay flat on their back?
Awesome question. This is my personal recommendation based on my experience with the science and the technology. Think about this again with music. I can whisper to you and say how nice this is. And I can say at the same exact tone and a larger volume how nice this is. And I can say at a larger volume how nice this is. And I can increase it that way too and increase the frequency. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is the distance that those waves traveled just increased. And when they increased, the strength of those waves, of those frequencies, maintained at a longer distance. So therefore, when you're laying on that mat, it induces at a certain distance. If you have a problem in your stomach and you are laying on your backside, it is going to be fairly ineffective or a much slower, longer process versus flipping over and inducing it closer to the problem or the area. I hope that makes sense the way that I'm breaking it down. Absolutely. If all I had was and I'll use IMRS because people know an IMRS, I would not lay static on my back. I would be dynamic as possible. So I want to bring up one other case that I talked about today that is one of the best ones. There was one of the first cases that really gave me my aha moment with this technology was in 2001, and there was a gentleman that had lost his leg in a machete accident in the Philippines, and he was missing his leg from above the knee down, and he came in and had foot pain. So how do you fix somebody with foot pain that doesn't have a foot, let alone most of his lower leg? It was a mind-boggling condition. He explained he'd gone to the Mayo Clinic and done neuroblocks. He had tried all sorts of medications. He had multiple surgeries. Nothing worked, and he was in chronic pain. And my mentor smiled almost cavalierly and said, I have this. I got this, Josh. And he took the applicator and he put it on the floor where this gentleman's foot used to be. And in about 10 minutes, you saw this gentleman's face, his whole body language change, and he started crying. And he was not crying because he was in pain. He was crying because he finally had relief. After 7 years or whatever it was of this pain, his foot pain was gone. Blew my mind, changed my life. How did we fix somebody's foot pain when they didn't have a foot? And it was at that moment I sort of knew that this technology transcends, I hurt my ankle playing basketball, or I broke my pinky playing baseball. It's something greater and bigger than that. And in my experience, it is very few cases that this doesn't work on. And if PEMF is not helping, it is not helping either because of the duration of the session, the application of the applicator or the technology, or the frequency of use, or the placement of the coil, or the last thing is emotional or physical blockage. And what I mean by that is there are 10%, 5% of the people that do not want to get better and they have a blockage that is preventing them from doing so. And there is a small percentage of people that are still doing the physical thing in which creates the problem. And the example I always go to is the guy 15 years ago in Australia that bought a machine for us to fix or cure the cirrhosis of his liver, as he said. And once his liver started to get better and he was healthy, he went back to the pub and started drinking with his Navy mates 4 times a week. So it was a salmon swimming upstream. But point being is, other than that, it's those 4 factors. Okay, let me see where Oliver had a question. And so Hugo, listen, let me say this. Anything spark chamber is going to be good. Anything spark chamber is going to be good. If you're asking me, Josh Silver, founder of Pulse Energy, is it as good as ours? No, it's not. But does that mean it's not going to work for you? No, that doesn't mean that's not going to work for you. It's going to work. The only question I have that I don't know is how well or how detailed, how quick it's going to work, how long it's going to last. Let me tie back into one other point. And this isn't my theory. This is Rife, Priori, Tesla, D'Arsenal, high frequency, high discharge devices and the studies of it. And even now, when you read on these pages about the frequency discharge and what frequency is for what condition, typically a lot of the terminal issues are high frequency issues, are found higher on the electromagnetic spectrum. So the reason more power is better isn't because we're trying to say, ooh, ours hurts more. We're trying to excite a larger frequency range on the electromagnetic spectrum. We're trying to resonate or get to that frequency that is tied in directly with this problem. What's crazy about the stuff that I see on Facebook now is most people don't know what's going on with this in Europe and in Austria. And I know of at least 2 clinics, one in Germany that, and I can say this now, say this because it's legal in another country and they do this, is they utilize the high power PEMF specifically where they do biological tests to determine not only what type of cancer you have, just a random, you have colon cancer, the specific type of cancer, the specific type of colon cancer, if there's any sort of relatable DNA that gives them information, and they come up with a formula to figure out how often and how frequent to use the PEMF in which to interrupt mitosis, to stop cell division, to stop the growth of the cancer cells. Is it successful 100% of the time? No, nothing ever will be. But is it successful a lot more than often? When you read their case reports, when you hear what goes on there, when you sort of look behind the curtain, the results are fantastic and remarkable. And it's no surprise that there are clinics popping up in other parts of the world that are trying to do this stuff, just because it seems to be that in places where it is legal in which to utilize the technology, they're finding great results. And the key is that high-end frequency, that is that resonance. By the way, these clinics do not have our device. It is that other device in Europe that I was talking about. But again, I'm lauding Spark Chamber here, not anything else. The other question, when people are talking about a full body mat on bottom, top, is Hugo? Yes, you can say much to Hugo. Yeah. So here's what we have found. And again, I'm not going to give away too much of the farm, but PEMF works best at 90-degree angles. A static on a shoulder is nowhere going to be as effective as rotating it. We always want to box an area, and that's going to be key. Just to answer your question, in terms of our devices, we have a big high power clinical one that's 38,000 US. And we have one that is more of a portable model that is right next to me. For some reason, when I bring this camera over, it doesn't work. We can send you the picture. That's 27,000 US. All of our devices and all of our products come with detail. I'm glad you asked this question, Oliver, because I wanted to bring this up earlier. All of our products come with detailed, customized, specific training that is ongoing. I read somewhere that said, hey, if you're not required to recertify by a company every year, I wouldn't buy from them. And my question to them was, who certified them? Where did they get their training or their information from? Because doing it annually isn't necessarily what we look at it. We look at it dynamic. We have ongoing training all the time. Give you an idea of the role in my company as I do 2 things. I help with the sales as often as I can, but for the most part, I'm consulting with practitioners, teams, individuals, specifically protocols, best practices, things like that. Because if your training is static on a book and static on a manual, it's not going to fit for everybody. So training is really, really important. And what that means for somebody like Oliver is 3 years from now, when you have a question, Oliver, you text me and you say, hey, Josh, this is going on with this. What do you know? And I'm going to say, hey, here's what Dr. Fred did, or what practitioner Mary did, or I'm going to connect you with that person and they're going to share it with you. That's where we're big on, is our network and the detailed information that we have. I know I'm going off on a tangent, but I just want people to understand in terms of where it is. Last thing that I want to bring up, why is our machine more expensive than, let's say, there's a $12,000, I think it's Parameds or somebody like that. It's the quality and the lifetime of our machine. Our machine is not comparable to, there's another competitor out there, I think they sell for $24,000. So they said, well, theirs is $2,000 cheaper. Yes, I understand, but the stuff on the inside is dramatically different. So what I tell people more than anything is, before you buy Kool-Aid, go drink a sip of it. Go out there and find one of our machines, contact us, set up a demo, and give yourself a chance to experience it. And if it can't be our machine, go try a spark chamber machine. Try any of the spark chamber ones out there. The results are dramatic and remarkable. I have a case study that I'm going to be publishing in about a month from a practitioner that brought in the high-end, high-power digital machine and brought in the high-power, high-end version of our machine and did a double-blind study with all of their patients, and ultimately chose to buy a machine just based on clinical outcomes, not looks, bells, whistles, things like that. I think that we have addressed all of the questions. Are there any other questions and things that I've missed, Chelsea? There's a lot in the chat. I just haven't gotten caught up.
No, I think we've covered everybody.
Awesome. I'll post a link to this once that, oh yeah, anxiety, sleep, inflammation, brain. I'm so glad you brought that up. You had messaged me earlier and I totally forgot to bring it up, and I apologize. I thought about you today. I got your message, and then I did a video interview with 2 practitioners that have a machine in Arizona that I'm about to post. And on his own, he brought up some of the things that he's seen with sleep, anxiety, depression, things like that. And I want to explain, when I talked about PEMF and homeostasis, I've seen awesome results with hyperthyroid and hypothyroid, underperforming and hyperperforming. So when I read somebody that had replied to you saying, oh no, you're going to get overstimulated and you're not going to be able to go to sleep, that may be for them, but that may not be for you. What we have found over the years is PEMF puts the body back in balance. It raises the lows and it lowers the highs. If you don't even mind me screen sharing for 1 minute, since I had forgotten, I'm going to show you something pretty cool. Okay, here's the perfect example of raising the lows and lowering the highs. If you got anybody out there knows Dr. Beverly Rubik out of San Diego, this is something she did almost 20 years ago, where she did before and after PEMF. And if you looked at the diagram on the left side and the diagram on the right, you can see from the gas discharge visualization of the left eye and right eye, the body is not in balance. And when you look at the after, look at the difference, especially with the right side. They became almost circles. Okay, so it was raising the lows, lowering the highs, is putting the body back in balance. Okay, so my experience is when I'm super stressed, when I'm wiped out, when I'm having a problem sleeping, I get on the machine, relaxes my autonomic nervous system, I go to sleep and it's easier. When I'm tired, when I'm sluggish, when I need to exercise, I get on the machine, I get a 15-minute session and it gives me an energy boost. So hopefully that answers your question. We'll do this a lot more times. I'm going to publish this recording, and my one shameless plug is I will put a link in there to our newsletter. We have a fantastic newsletter that goes out probably once or twice a month with case reports, before and after pictures, all these videos, all these things that people aren't seeing. That way you guys can subscribe and be a part of it. Happy to help. Any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thanks everybody for sharing and spending their time with us.
Thanks, everybody.